This is a panel about index providers. We have the three dominant index providers here on the podium. Let me introduce them. To my immediate left is Nick Genren, Fixed Income Index Product Manager at Bloomberg. Nick is based in New York, manages fixed income benchmark index product for Bloomberg. His main responsibility of both him and his team is new product development and research. It also includes ETF pipelines, senior relationship management, consulting with clients, on and on. If there's a question about Bloomberg and index, Nick is your starting point. Okay, to his left is Preston Peacock. Preston is a senior research data analyst at ICE. Preston has over 2 decades of experience with bond indices. I presume that preceded ICE as well?
Yes.
Okay. In his role, Preston frequently advises institutional investors on a wide range of benchmark selection, performance measurement, and routinely assists clients in the creation of custom indices. So that's a thread we might want to pick up on later. And then all the way to our left, last but not least, Nikki Stefanelli is the managing director at FTSE Russell. Nikki is the director on benchmark strategy teams at FTSE Russell. She's responsible for business development and management of all benchmarks. That includes not just fixed, but also equities. Prior to joining FTSE Nets, Nikki led benchmark research and development for the Barclays index business. So what you have here, I think, is kind of the Mount Rushmore of the index business right now. We've got a lot of experience, and they're all in prominent roles. So thank you for your interest. What I'd like to do, we only have 30 minutes, but we're going to be very efficient with the time. I just have a few opening remarks I'm going to offer about our thinking going into single security from an index standpoint. But then then we handed it to you guys. And so I'd like to get your thinking. As you received it, maybe a few 3 to 5 minutes or so of opening remarks of where you are now. So let me start. You know, as I mentioned earlier in the session, one of our primary themes was do no harm. We didn't want to force anyone's hand in terms of exchange. We didn't want to force anyone's hands in terms of valuation, gain, loss, any of that. And so the notion was similar as we think about index, which is there a way that people don't have to rebalance their positions day one? That there was nothing about what happened from Friday to Monday that changed what the index looks like or would require any kind of balancing trade. That was the hope, number one of ours. The second was, but we weren't really sure how you were going to recognize this UMBS market, particularly since it's kind of a merge lane, if you will, of what is separately Fannie and Freddie lanes now as we start to bring the Freddie product over. Finally, we wanted it to, at least from your standpoint, make it reflective of what's investable in the marketplace. So that kind of gets to custom indices or not, what's available. And then finally, this notion of us paying investors a few ticks for the longer delay, we weren't really sure how that would play in. So if I could kind of start left to right.
Sure.
Nick, can you tell us kind of where Bloomberg is in its thinking, how you're approaching this problem, and things that might be of general interest to the audience?
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and again, thanks to Fannie and Freddie for having us here today. So, you know, from our standpoint, I think this all starts with, you know, whenever you have a dynamic like this in the marketplace, whether it could be any topic really, but something that could potentially alter how the index is thinking about things and its methodology, you really have to start reaching into your clients and really getting thorough feedback, right? And you guys have probably heard that all throughout today, but the key part of our process is really to make sure that we canvass a wide variety of stakeholders and not just you know, a select few or regional or what have you, and that even we reach out to dealers, which we may have not done back in our Barclays days, but certainly are much more open to now that we're at Bloomberg. So I would characterize us right now. Now, again, I know there's some specific issues we'll probably be getting a little bit more into once we start getting into this. But from our standpoint right now, active client consultation. We've reached out to several already. We're continuing to do that. And you know, probably even bring this into our formal index advisory council process within a few months, and then, you know, kind of make announcements from there. So I'd characterize us as not having made any final decisions at this stage. We might have some ideas about where we want to go, And one other thing that I really have to bring into it is, now that we're part of Bloomberg, certainly there are things that we have to consider as far as, how is the terminal handling this and the generics on the terminal, and, ideally everything is together, but there's always possibilities that the index kind of deviates as far as how it has to represent the security. So
Okay,
throw
good.
that out there. Yep.
We'll hit you up with details in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Preston, can you tell us the same?
Sure. I think we're still very much catching up with, on the consultation side, because our stakeholders are, as an index provider, are of course market participants. And so how we represent this in the index needs to make sense for investors. When they're comparing their portfolio and their index, things have to make sense. So we're still very much understanding what they expect us to have in the index, how it's represented. And I think to your opening remarks about not forcing anyone's hand, well, it actually leaves us a lot of options, right? If you're not forcing anyone's hand in a certain direction, then there are options that we as index providers can go various directions to essentially solve the same problem, representation in the index. So and there are various pros and cons to each option, technical issues to deal with, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, I think it's market consensus that will solve that question, and we will operate in a certain direction. Going against the convention is not going to be a winner for anyone, any of our stakeholders, and would make no sense. I think we're quite far down the road now in the consultation process. I think the technical details from reference data and pricing, that's already well underway. So at the end of the day, it's okay, well, how do you capture all of that information, represent it in the index? And that's where I think all of you in this room are probably going to have a say about what you expect us to show.
Great. Nikki?
Great. Yeah, thanks, Mark. And thank you, everyone, to everyone at Freddie and Fannie for having us here today. So I'm representing FTSE Russell, which is part of the London Stock Exchange Group. And FTSE Russell sits within the Information Services Division, which recently acquired the Yieldbook platform and the Citi fixed income indices. So the benchmark that we're here today to talk about is the Legacy Citi Mortgage Index, which is now the FTSE Mortgage Index. So we've been working very closely with the agencies around kind of readiness. We were down in DC in December presenting, at that stage around our governance framework to consider changes like this. Since then, we've spent a good deal of time thinking and talking internally and with our customers about the types of questions that we'd want to formally consult around. And since then, we have launched a consultation that is, you can pick it up by our booth outside. It's available on our website for everyone to kind of see and access. And, our consultations really are our core mechanism for listening to the market and, acting as a sounding board for how market structure changes like this are absorbed by the benchmark. So the one thing I would say there is just that, as an organization whose main business is benchmarking, we really do have a robust governance framework and an established consultation process to consider changes like this.
Okay, great. If I can stay with Nikki, and we'll start the questions.
Okay.
So tell us a little bit about the consultation. I know you have a packet out there, but can anyone participate, or what are the qualifications, and is there a window on this topic?
Yeah, so the consultation was formally opened last week, and it will run through the end of June. Anyone can access it. Transparency is very important to us. We have a process to, refine the responses that we receive and consider those results as part of our formal governance structure. But, we do recognize that this market structure change is unique in its breadth and the number of stakeholders that are involved. So we would encourage everyone to participate there.
Okay, great. Preston, if I can hit you up with a question. As exchanges occur, the amount of Freddie Mac generics in the index will be reduced. These are the old 45s. At what point do you remove them? And will this be a special case?
Yeah, when you say Freddie Mac reduction, it's, I guess, legacy, right?
Yeah,
We're
the gold
talking about-
PCs.
We're talking about, the 45-day. So the issue here, and I think it hinges on exactly where we all fall out on how are we going to build generics when the exchange process starts. There are several ways to go, as I mentioned in the intro, one of which is you just start adding in, you know, the new, essentially, the new pools into the existing generics. Bit messy, you've got 45-day and 55-day mixed in, technical problems, details may not be optimum. The other option is, of course, they become a part of existing 55-day product, which is the Fannie Mae generics. So that's one option. But regardless of how that aggregation, the pool aggregation process goes to create what cohorts the new securities go into, at some point the existing legacy pool set's going to be reduced. And there are minimum inclusion criteria for any index. And for us, it's 250 million at the production year level. So at some point, you're going to reach, as exchanges happen, I'm assuming that they're going to go apace. At some point, the legacy product will be reduced. So the aggregate pool totals per production year would fall below that, at which point those generics would no longer qualify for the index and would be removed. Now, as the exchanges happen, again, they're going into the index based on the inclusion criteria. If they are going into existing Fannie Mae generics, right, combined, then, well, those are already big enough for inclusion. They're already there. So those are just going to grow in size. So, you know, if you stick with this kind of model, you have a reduction of the Freddie Mac exposure and in generic form, and an increase in the Fannie Mae generic products. So that would be essentially just a one-for-one, just reduction of one, move over. If you have a new set of generics that you're going to create, then that creates a bit of a problem from one point of view. At that point, you have to create a minimum size. You have to build a certain kind of core size, and it's 5 billion for issuer and type, coupon, and and production year has to be 5 billion in order to actually qualify. So you'd have to reach a critical size before that would come in. So I would think that would be probably a suboptimal choice based on the reality of how this process is going to work. So the path of least resistance, I think, and you all will tell me this, would be that they shift over to existing Fannie Mae generics. And that way, the Freddie Macs would simply evaporate and go immediately into the Fannie Mae generics.
Great. So that's probably a good segue for Bloomberg. And Nick, can you tell us, we know, for instance, 30-year Fannie fixed has always been FNCL. Mm-hmm. And at some point, we'll switch over to Freddie 55-day UMBS being part of that same cohort.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about Bloomberg and how maybe those cohorts, as they're being described on the analytics side, will flow through perhaps on the index side or not.
Well, yeah, again, with our index, I think we have to make sure that we're treating, again, ideally everything kind of aligns with the generics on the terminal. Is that guaranteed at this stage? No, not at all, because we have to make sure on the index side that we're getting the feedback from the index stakeholders as to whether or not they truly want to see different representations as far as the index is concerned. And again, just to give a little bit of background, most of you probably know this, you got hundreds of thousands of pools, you're putting them into generics based on agency coupon program and vintage year. So you've got 320 generics in the index. Currently, about 100 of them are Freddie generics, Freddie 45 generics, right? So basically you have to then take that and understand, are we just going to move them into Fannies, as Preston was talking about here, or is there's a few other options that you could even think about. Preston was talking about, okay, what does it take for a generic security to fall out of the index? Ours is $1 billion, yours is 250. We all have thresholds on these. There is some argument to be made if you don't want to if you want to make sure you're not disrupting anything, to kind of combine the balance amounts, even though they might be represented in different generics, that you're combining that, and so you're not losing any securities right off the bat potentially. So if you want to get kind of more complex about it and make sure that the market tomorrow looks exactly the same as it did once the program started, you could potentially do something like that. Again, that's just an option on the table that we'll be talking to clients about. But again, I think the three avenues are pretty well defined as far as this. Put the mirror pools into the old Freddie generics. Again, don't know if that makes a lot of sense. Create new generics for the Freddie mirror pools and any new Freddie issuance, right? And or move everything into Fannies.
Okay.
And so those are what we're battling through right now. And honestly, the feedback to date has been a bit mixed, and it's about arriving at the consensus here.
Got it. So somewhere in all of those views come this notion of mirrors. Freddie said that we're going to start populating these mirrors, and right now I think there are about 73,000 of them, beginning in August, so well before we get to go live and all this. So I guess my presumption would be these mirrors will show up on the systems, but there won't be any holders of those securities yet, so they won't have any weight. Is that fair to presume across the indices?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, and now let me take it to the next
least
level.
for
So
myself.
once we get to single security, it's going to be a daily activity. So in starting probably in early May. So following the reg dates of May, we'll start showing on our daily new issue report how much is turned in, QSIP by QSIP. So at the end of each day, you can track kind of the migration, if you will, from the legacy to the new. My understanding of indices, though, is they're more of a monthly creature, not a daily. So let me throw a jump ball out for anybody that wants to kind of address, how are you going to traverse the daily versus monthly?
I'm happy to start it quick and then just follow on, but basically, yeah, they're always going to be a monthly rebalance no matter what. It just depends on when you kind of set that projected universe and it becomes next month's index, right? And right now we have one magic date, 16th business day of the month, although we're thinking of moving that up earlier in the month. But regardless, right now it's 16th business day of the month. We set the new index, so all the factors get updated and all the balances get updated, new issuance gets updated, and we set this projected universe for next month. They're called the statistics universe for those who want to use that term. And then it just, so people know exactly what they're going to get next month in the index for about a week or so prior. With this new dynamic of having balances move around daily, that's again one of the, and you'll see a polling question on it later, do people want to see a continued update of that projected universe as the month goes on until X date prior to month end and then set it? Or do you just still prefer this idea of one capture on one specific date and just leave the process alone? Again, it's just a few things we're going through. Yep.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Right.
Any others on that?
Yeah, I would just kind of echo Nick's comments. It's hard to envision a scenario where you would change the underlying kind of mechanics of the way a return is computed, which holds a weight of each generic constant from the beginning of the month. We kind of are putting it out there for views from everyone in the audience about whether or not having visibility into that preview universe for the following months, kind of returns weighting, is something that is required of us as benchmark providers, or they have a kind of multitude of ways to pull that data outside of us in our function. So kind of, is it helpful, is it required, or is it not necessary?
Right. Okay, let me turn the page to another topic, which is the 3 ticks. So as we talked about a couple times today, you turn in the 45, get back a 55, and get a check effectively for 3 ticks. How will that be reflected or not in the indices?
Anybody?
You want to?
Oh, I'll start. There's a couple of ways we can go here as well, and we've been thinking this through. On the one hand, as you bring in the new mirror pools, you can certainly reflect that price in the exchange process. In other words, what it's being exchanged for. Those can be different prices, right? Mm-hmm. So you can incorporate that independently. You can take the 45-day price, add on the 3 ticks, and then there you go. That's your exchange level. So on the other hand, though, the way that we're thinking about this is that 3 ticks so-called, is really just compensation for the price drop going from 45 to 55 days. So at that point, then you're just being made whole. So is it really worth the effort? It's already kind of in the index. There's a rounding error return impact, if anything, actually. And the rest, and what impact it might be would be rounding error and kind of like just, there's one school of thought, I think, in our shop on this that's keep it simple.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Nikki, do you have others?
Yeah, we've been so bold as to say as part of our consultation that we don't anticipate trying to capture the compensation as part of an index return. The thinking there is, somewhat philosophical insofar as, the objective of an index is to capture the economic reality of the average investor. Because the exchanges are voluntary, it would be difficult to, try to quantify a level that is applicable to everyone who used our product. A parallel that we've kind of thrown around is that of withholding taxes. So the indices generally don't try and account for a withholding tax. So we kind of saw that as, kind of a precedent almost. But, again, I think we're all still in kind of feedback gathering mode. If we had a very strong kind of mandate that the market wanted to see some sort of quantification of that level, we'd take that back for sure.
Great. Kind of one more question. This is off script a bit. So the Fed, right? It's the 800-pound gorilla in the index space, right? Preston, you had mentioned a little bit about custom indices. Is it fair to assume that generally the index world presumes the Fed is in or out of the tradable supply at this point?
I don't think there's a totally clear answer on that.
Okay.
I think it very much depends on exactly what investor you're talking to, an investor base. Because this supply that they hold is coming in and out of the market and can change obviously it's reported regularly, and it can change. And it's not retired. It's being held just as of any other portfolio. There's buy and hold investors. That stuff's not going anywhere either. So on the one hand, I think you have one school of thought that would say it exists in the market, and the market being defined as it's being held in a portfolio and it's not retired. On the other hand, there's the concept of free float, and you can define free float for bonds in a way that would say, yeah, if you can identify this stuff, you could remove it. So I think this is where the complicated world of custom indices and what is appropriate for one portfolio may not be appropriate for another, and it's not for me to say. It's for me to build indexes.
Got it. Any different, Nick?
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty similar as far as that's concerned. I mean, for me, back when we brought that under consultation in our index governance process, was kind of actually for me, in being this many years in the business, one of the more interesting debates that we've had back and forth as far as how we should represent that in the index. In the end, I didn't really take the easy way out, but we basically said we're going to keep everything in our standard index, but we'll create a float-adjusted index for those that want to use it. We've seen some usage of that. I wouldn't say it's been significant, but certainly some major clients have used it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of nullifies some of the impact of whether they exchange or not,
Yep.
perhaps.